My numbers are still going up, so I'll just give it a few more seconds before we start. Okay, welcome everybody this afternoon to Undertaking HR review panels. My name's Emma Bolchin, for those of you that don't know me, and I am Director of Professional Development here at NGA. I also chair a special and pupil referral unit local committee that is part of a 30-school multi-academy trust. So for my sins in that guise, as well as a couple of others, have had lots of review panel experience. And I'm joined today by my colleague Sam. Sam, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Sam Henson. I'm the Director of Policy and Communications at NGA. I've governed in various capacities over the last 10 years or so, and I'm currently a MAT trustee. So that's me.
Okay. So Sam, do you want to start with the housekeeping arrangements before we launch into the presentation main?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much everyone for joining us for this webinar. It is a fairly short time that we've got together, so I hope you find it engaging. You'll be able to access the recording afterwards if there's anything you want to go back over. Everyone will be muted except for Emma and I throughout the webinar, so this isn't a particularly interactive session. We do have a couple of polls that we will get you to fill in, but it is mainly a case of Emma and I talking and going through a presentation for the next half an hour or so. We aim to be done, really we're hoping within the half an hour, shouldn't go much over that. So do bear with us. Any questions that you've got that you're seeking an answer to that we don't answer throughout the course of the webinar itself, do put that in the chat. We will look to give you an answer to any of those questions after the webinar, and we can email you. Yeah, I think that's everything.
Okay, thanks, Sam. If we go on to the next slide, then I'm going to get the first poll launched, if that's okay. I'd just like to see the range of folks who are tuned in today. Sometimes that dynamic can impact on the types of panels you're more likely to be involved in, or at least the frequency, if not the type. So it's always good for us to do a bit of a sense check on who we've got on the call today. And there's a couple of polls that follow that we might be able to correlate to that. Okay. So if everybody could answer their poll. We've got quite a variety. We've got some of everybody by the look of it, but lots of either primary mats or maintained primaries. A few mixed mats. We've got special or pro as well, some colleagues of mine, which is great to see. And secondary SATs as well, actually. Quite a high proportion of secondary SATs given the number in the sector. Thank you. Okay, that's really helpful. Okay, over to our next slide.
Thank you. So I'm going to get us started off just by thinking, setting the scene really for what we're going to be covering in the session. And really, Emma and I thought actually the best place to start is to really focus on what the actual link between governing boards and HR is, and then obviously we'll come on to the role of HR panels themselves in a moment or two. But despite some governing boards not technically being the legal employer in some settings, actually all boards will have some responsibilities or some role in HR in one way or another. And there's really a clear link here that where HR comes into the core functions of the boards in terms of testing the culture that enables the vision to come to fruition, in terms of holding leaders to account, both for the education performance of the school and but also the performance management of staff, and also in making sure money is spent well. So there's that really clear link between the role of governing boards in HR and the core functions. And while the operational employment decisions, as we all know, rest firmly with the management of staff and with the leaders of the school or trust, actually the governing board has a very distinct role in the oversight and focusing on ensuring staff related policies and procedures are in place. That's not us saying the boards write them, definitely not, but ensuring that they're in place, that actually the organisation is compliant with employment and equalities legislation, and the policies that are in place are really aiding the organisation in developing that culture that is really key to the success of what you're doing. And HR panels themselves are a key part of the full picture, if you like, a key part of the full picture of good governance in schools and trusts, both in terms of governance offering accountability, but also in the way that it demonstrates that transparency and that ethical practice as well. So there's clearly a link here, and like in any other sector, there has to be procedures in place that will enable major issues and breaches to be addressed, and for accounts to be listened to, and for decisions made to resolve any issues that arise. So Emma and I are going to be covering these points throughout this session, and really looking at what the governing board's role in panels in particular is going to be. Let me move the slide on. Sorry, Emma. So we're going to launch our next poll. How many employment panels have you attended? So if you could let us know, and this is just really to give us a flavour of where people are coming at. It might be that you've never been on one before, and actually that's why you wanted to join us. It might be that you've done loads, and actually, you know, there's probably lots of things that you could share. So obviously feel free to use the chat to put any ideas, any thoughts down, and we can take that away with us as we go along. But it looks like, again, we have a fair mix, but quite a lot of you actually haven't been on one yet. So hopefully this session will be really helpful for you. But there are some of you who've done the odd one or two, 3 or 4, but some of you who've done, by the looks of it, quite a lot as well. So I think that there is a real mix here. And for those of you who have been on one before, really interested in your thoughts as well as we go along the session today. So thank you for filling that in, and we'll move on and over to Emma.
Thanks, Sam. So really, it's I suppose in terms of the levels of experience, we've kind of got lots of people who have come from everywhere. But even if you have been on 1 or 2 or 3 or however many, I think it's one of those things that you feel like you never get used to, because there are so many different types of HR panel. And what we're aiming to do today is not get into specifics because we want it to be relevant to you all. So what we're seeking to address today, I suppose, are those general rules for whatever type of HR panel you find yourself on. And this slide really covers some useful guidance that can help you make sure that you're doing things the right way. So hopefully those of you who have been involved in some way, shape or form have accessed these documents. But if not, you've got them on this slide. The requirements are set out in the DfE's published guidance, which is called Staffing and Employment Advice for Schools. And that guidance, it advises you on matters that are contained within employment law, and it lays out what should be reflected in your school or trust HR policies. So such as the requirements of the school staffing in England regulations, which are from 2009, and that's for maintained schools, or the education regulations, which are from 2014, which is for independent schools, and that also includes academies and free schools as well. So you're looking at two slightly different sets of regulations with regard to that. Regardless of the type of panel, the guidance gives you full information on what must be done. So for HR panels, the guidance states it's especially important that all schools should have access to an appropriate professional for HR advice. So you might buy into an external HR provider, you may have somebody employed within the trust to be your HR specialist or even a team of people. It's absolutely critical that you make use of those. Make use as well of the ACAS resources and advice that they offer, and also obviously fulfil your duties or make sure you're fulfilling your duties under the Equality Act 2010. The DfE Equality Act guidance is also available to you to support your interpretation of that legal act. There are slightly different rules about which policies maintained schools and academies have to adopt. So you've got to ensure as well that you're using the policies and procedures that have been adopted by your board. All school and trust boards are responsible for establishing their own staff procedures. So you need to take account of the relevant legislation and guidance and ensure that they include procedures to enable staff to appeal against any of the decisions that are made at that initial panel. So bear in mind, is it a first panel, is it an appeal panel, etc. The DfE has published guidance on managing staff employment in schools. That's what it's called, guidance on managing staff employment in schools, if you go to the DfE website and Google it. And that's for all boards with advice on establishing those procedures. So you can just follow that and it's laid out really clearly for you. So hopefully that's a fairly quick win if you don't have them in place already. Lots of you, I'm sure, will have. Okay.
Brill, thanks, Emma. So I'm just going to build on that for a moment and just take a step back really and think about why is it we need panels in the first place, and what should they be rooted in. And all governing boards, as you know, have a duty of care towards their staff, but also crucially their pupils. And I think it's really helpful to take a step back and think about why panels are an important safeguard for schools and trusts in terms of the offering for their pupils as well. So boards obviously are going to be wanting to think about how they're ensuring a safe and secure environment for staff and pupils. For staff, thinking about a reasonable work-life balance, and again for both staff and pupils, thinking about well-being, and that panels have a clear role in supporting all of these things, creating the conditions really in which the school can thrive. And I think that's what's really key here, to actually panels when done well, when done properly, can really support the organisation in doing that. And then crucially, that helps the school ensure that pupils can succeed. Boards who are good employers are not only inclusive and avoid discriminatory practices, but they promote progressive policies, and they crucially demonstrate a commitment to the taxpayer, that they are willing, that they are able to tackle anything that really might threaten the educational experience of pupils and the well-being and care of the whole staff. So the panel then, it might seem like a fairly humble thing, but actually it's got a big role in these things. It's got a big role in developing the culture that staff want to be a part of, and how this translates really into the retention of staff, and increasing capacity and productivity and performance as well, and ultimately, like I was saying, the outcomes for children. So it's a key mechanism, if you like, for ensuring that your organisation can maintain its position as an employer of choice, and addressing anything that threatens that. Boards are essentially holders of public office, so overseeing the spending decisions of vast amounts of public money is a crucial part of that role, and as such they need to abide by the law and principles of public life, and upholding ethical standards, and panels enables is one of the mechanisms that enables you to do that when there's anything that might need to be addressed. And it's in how panels are both approached and carried out that can say really quite a lot about the organisation, its commitment, its approach, and its culture as well. So Emma's now going to talk about when panels might be needed.
Thanks, Sam. So, well, they're needed for a whole host of reasons, and here are some of the most common. So one of the things that we want to do is to see how that relates to our audience today, and what are the most common reasons you've had to set up and attend or chair an HR panel. So from my perspective, looking at the list on the screen at the moment, I think the only one that I haven't had to do is a redundancy panel, and some, unfortunately, I kind of had to do lots of all of the others. So there are 60% of you who have had some experience of HR panels on the call today, but I'm also thinking the 40% who haven't, you might have joined today thinking actually you're preparing for a particular type of panel. So if that's true of you, then please answer the question in the poll if we could launch that one. And if obviously you haven't and you've got no idea whether you'll have to attend one, then feel free to abstain from this vote at the moment. Okay, let's see. So at the moment, disciplinary is definitely the front runner, with the others all fairly even. I will just share those results with you so that you can see where we're at. So disciplinary is unfortunately the kind of clear front runner, really, with redundancy, which is the one that I haven't had to do, as being thankfully the lowest of all of those. So that's really interesting to know. Thank you. Okay. If we could go on to the next slide, Sam, what I'm going to do is, I suppose, talk you through what you need to do when a panel is convened, if you like. So what's your key role? And this slide lays out, I suppose, those steps, starting with reviewing either the recommendation or the decision of the executive leader, whether that's the head or your CEO, or the decision that the first panel arrived at, if you're obviously chairing or being part of an appeal panel. Really what you need to do is check out that all relevant policies and procedures have been followed effectively. Ask for evidence of that if you haven't had it beforehand, if it wasn't clear in the paperwork. Has employment and equality law being followed? Do you therefore want to ultimately uphold the recommendation or decision that was made, either by the head teacher, CEO, or the previous panel? Or is it that you feel actually a new decision or a new recommendation is needed? And then finally, you also need to ensure that further steps or actions are taken and that everybody who's involved knows what's going to happen next. Particularly if you're the chair, it's really your role to kind of lay out what the next steps are to those people who've been involved in the panel, but also there might be learning for you as a board or learning for the setting that you govern, whether that's a trust or a school. And it'll be your role as well to make sure that those actions happen, even if they're not a direct part of the disciplinary or capability or whatever panel, even if they're not a direct part of the outcome, or if they don't affect the outcome for any individuals. It might be that as a setting, you really need to learn from that. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Emma. So as Emma was just saying, these panels usually, by and large, are going to be reviewing a decision that's already been taken by the head teacher or an appeals panel. So I guess what we want to establish is whether or not you, as a member of a panel, feel fully equipped to review that decision. So it's really crucial that any panel member has the opportunity to spend time figuring out if they've got the tools at their disposal that they need in order to do that, and if they have the understanding as to how and why that initial decision was made. So most it's probably worth saying that actually a fairly common thing that happens is when panels are being formed, there's a bit of a scramble for forming a panel in the first place. And actually sometimes panels don't happen because or don't happen within the timeframes needed because the school or the trust struggles to get one together. But most schools actually have arrangements to use a board member from another school, and even if they don't, many lawyers have argued that actually it's better in some ways to depart from your policy and use competent non-governors and trustees. That might actually be preferable than blindly following policies. But if you're doing that, you have to make it absolutely clear why you are departing from it and get permission to do so. So that's just a little side note, really. The question really, I guess, from this side is do you have the full picture? Do you have both sides of the story, and how do you know? And I think taking a step back before you actually turn up on the day to ask that, I think is really important. The other thing to ask yourself is, do you have a vested or personal interest? And if you do, then step away and make that clear. Don't go into a panel if there's a conflict there. You need to go into this knowing that you can make decisions that are in the best interests of why the school exists, the pupils. That means acting with frankness, that means acting with transparency and objectivity when taking that ultimate decision at the end, and doing that impartially on merit of using the best evidence available without discrimination or bias. Panel members need really to show that they have that understanding of the full context, that they have the ability to see the case from all angles and are able to exercise that independent view and judgment as well. So when making decisions, we've got here these 5 things to think about: being rational, reasonable, fair, proportionate, and lawful. I'll just take these one by one quickly. Rational is all about being based on reason and facts rather than emotion or bias, like I was covering in the previous slide. So a panel really needs to think about how it's taking account of all the relevant factors and disregard all irrelevant factors. Reasonable, the sanction needs to be appropriate and in line with the relevant school policy. So ask that question, and if it isn't, need to get an understanding of how it's ended up that way, and that's where obviously you'll really need to challenge it. Fair, all parties need to be treated fairly clearly, but the policies need to be applied fairly as well, and any mitigating factors need to be taken into account. Proportionate, the outcome of the decision has to be not way off out there in terms of what the actual offence was. Is it proportionate to the offence, and is that obvious? Lawful. Does it comply with what Emma was talking about earlier? Human rights, education, employment law, the Equality Act, and so on. And actually, crucially, has HR advice been sought and followed? So when exploring the evidence, doing a panel means that you'll receive this great big bundle of information. Oh, sorry. And it might look daunting, but actually, in terms of getting the right decision, actually that bundle is your best friend, really, and you need to give a considerable amount of time and space to hanging out with this friend, because actually it's got all the information in it that you need before you get to the panel and before you get to the stage of asking questions. That evidence pack usually is put together by the governance professional or someone in the school team dealing with HR, and it's crucial. If it's not provided, then the panel shouldn't be going ahead, and if it's not provided in a good time period, then that's something to be questioned as well. Most policies will specify that it needs to be 5 school days in advance before, and also when the panel begins, if you're chairing it, that's one thing you should be checking. Actually, has everyone received it? Has everyone read it? And making sure that everybody's coming to the panel with the same information to hand. Emma.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Well, not surprisingly, top of this slide, given my role as Director of Professional Development, you'll see that in thinking about preparation, I'm keen to kind of emphasise the role of training, whether that's doing an e-learning module that gives more detail than obviously this brief overview that Sam and I have got time to whistle through today. It could be a face-to-face session, or you could spend considerable time and get advice regarding practice from your HR professional. As we laid out, it's critical to have that access at the beginning. And then I would say only offer to chair a panel if you are trained and you do feel confident. Panel members need to set aside enough time to do all of the things on this list, really. So to thoroughly read through the evidence pack, I like to make notes when I'm reading through those evidence packs and jot down questions as you go through. Review the paperwork to get a clear understanding of the background to the recommendations or decisions. How did the previous panel or the head or CEO arrive at that decision, and why? If there's any area of dispute or where the evidence isn't clear, make sure you make a note of that as well, because you'll want to dig deeper during the panel on that. Note any mitigating circumstances, and also if you've done it as you go through, great, but if not, once you get to the end of all of that, make sure you've got time to really think about what questions it is that you want to ask and prepare them beforehand. That's not to say that if you haven't prepared a question while you're in the proceedings, if another one comes to mind, that you can't ask that as well. But I think it's really important to at least get those basics down and make sure you've got kind of your ideal questions thought out in advance to make sure you at least get those answered. It can be nerve-wracking and awkward at times. So being prepared kind of helps still those nerves, make sure that you can stay calm and all of those things for everybody concerned. Okay, the next slide is some key points that I want to highlight on principles and standards. So I'm just going to talk you through the things that are on the screen, really. So any decision of a school must be made in line with the principles of administrative law. So it must be lawful, rational, reasonable, fair and proportionate. is slightly different than kind of that criminal standard of reasonable doubt. This is all based under the civil standard of proof applying. So it really means that you get to make your judgment call based on the balance of probability. So it's not that beyond reasonable doubt that you see in a court of law. So it's slightly different, which does give you a different slant on things when you're in those panels and those meetings, or it can have an impact. So it's important to know that. Schools have got a statutory duty not to discriminate on the basis of protected characteristics such as gender, race, disability, and so on. So make sure that everybody on the panel is aware of all of those protected characteristics and any opportunity for sort of discrimination or unfair treatment outside of those characteristics too. Exclusion panels, not quite the same as HR panels, but they should give particular consideration to the fair treatment of students from vulnerable groups. So really prioritising in that instance the needs of those vulnerable children, rather than perhaps having that more kind of, I suppose, objective view. Not that it isn't objective when you're in an exclusion panel as well, but I suppose you have got a priority focus there, which is on those children and young people from vulnerable groups. Okay, thanks, Sam. I think that's everything on that slide.
Great, thanks, Emma. So I guess as we've tried to do throughout this webinar, we wanted to again strip it back and think about the panel in the most simplistic way possible. And I think that's partly because it can be quite easy to overcomplicate panels, and actually it's really helpful to think about them in this three-step process. Step 1, facts. Step 2, breach. Step 3, decision. So step 1, establishing the facts, is all about scrutinizing that evidence pack we were talking about, asking the questions of those present during the meeting when you get that opportunity, and actually question if there has been enough evidence for you to be satisfied with that things have been taken on the basis of the previous slide that Emma was just talking about. Step 2, did the breach happen, and did it happen to warrant the original decision? Is it clear what part of which policy or procedure the staff member has breached? Has the head teacher or school acted appropriately? So I guess in other words, what I'm saying is, what does the policy or guidance actually say that they should have done, and did they actually do it? Was the staff member treated fairly and in line with the things that we've been talking about during the last half an hour, the Equalities Act and employment law and so on? And then was HR advice sought and followed? And then step 3, the decision, was it in line with the policy? And again, was it proportionate, lawful, and fair? For the panel to uphold the recommendation or the decision of the head teacher and any sanctions that went with it, they would need to be satisfied that the answer to those questions in step 2 and 3 is yes. Otherwise, it might be that that you've been in a panel that's been the case. The panel will need to choose not to uphold the recommendation, and depending on the context, an alternative outcome will need to be agreed. Emma, this one's you, isn't it?
Okay, not too much more to say really. Actually, we've got a few more slides and then we're bringing it to a close. But what I wanted to do was, I suppose, give you some do's and don'ts really for those all important questioning techniques to hone in advance of the panel. So this really just talks you through saying, do ask neutral probing questions. So some good starters are, can you tell me about? To build questions, please can you tell me more about, or extend what you were saying on? Check if you don't understand or feel that a response was superficial. Summarize your interpretation. So you might want to reflect, is it that you're saying that just to check something out? Listen carefully to what's being said and meant. Appear interested. It might sound obvious, but sometimes if you're frustrated by a particular situation, that's harder. Make eye contact. and build rapport. And I suppose we've said, haven't we, try to appear relaxed. Sorry if everybody can hear my dog. She's just going mental at something. Hopefully it's not interrupting the presentation too much. And then things to avoid. There's a couple on this slide. It might seem really obvious, but actually people do this by accident. So they nod when the school responds because they're on the school side potentially, or they don't then nod to the complainant or the complaints that they're listening to, or showing any signs of irritation. Don't interrupt or hurry answers. And I suppose don't ask closed questions unless they're really necessary. So the yes, no answer type questions. And also, I suppose, avoid leading questions. So did X happen because, or was that the reason that you did such and such on a particular day? So don't kind of ask those kind of questions. And also something that says we're confident the head teacher would not show favoritism or something like that. So don't imply that you've already made your decision, really. I suppose that's key. And obviously don't go into it having already made your decision, be open. And also try to avoid excessively long or multiple questions. So that's just sort of some advice really, which I think is captured by this slide as well. Thanks, Sam.
Well, thanks, Emma. This is our final slide on the topic itself. So this takes us to the deliberation and the decision and how it's communicated afterwards. Emma's covered some of these points already, so I won't go through them. But I do think it's really important when you're deliberating, as it is in the panel itself, that the panel members are really careful that they put down feelings of loyalty towards the head teacher. You know, that can be tricky as you balance your kind of wider governance role in providing challenge and supports to the head or other staff. But it's really important as you're deliberating to really be coming at this from that neutral point. It's also sometimes difficult for panels to completely agree on a decision between them, and actually if you're in that situation, that's okay, that does happen, but that's why we all say panels need an odd number. So most panels that you go on tend to have 3 people. It's clearly preferable for the panel to come to a unanimous decision, but just in case, that having that odd number does help that. If someone dissents and actually there's disagreement, or there is a bit of a debate, again, that's fine. But one thing, and I'm sure everyone knows this, but just as a cautionary mention, one thing that is really key and important is that nobody talks about what was said in the panel outside of that room. It's really not okay for anyone to reveal anything confidential of the matter outside the panel itself. If the panel is unable to make a decision, for example, they need more information, and actually something's come to light, that's when the chair really should look to adjourn it and allow time for that to be that extra information, that extra evidence to be supplied before a date is reconvened. It's very rare, but it's definitely can happen sometimes. So once that deliberation process is over and you've made that decision, the decision needs to be transparent and clearly reasoned and set out in the crucial decision letter. That decision letter is absolutely essential. It's a formal document that must contain certain prescribed information, and if you're chairing that, the panel get advice on that about what needs to go in there, depending on the nature of the panel itself. But one kind of piece of overall advice with that is, in the past, I've definitely seen some letters that can come across in a way that can almost aggravate the situation further. So making sure letters are written in a sensitive way, the decision is clearly reasoned, but also you're not including lots of unnecessary information and detail that can complicate things further. and then making sure that that letter is supplied within the time frame that's specified. And then also there's some kind of checkpoints here that you can take away with, as well. Just for your information. The one thing I'll quickly mention before we finish is the role of the clerk in producing good minutes. So obviously that's really essential. So that brings us on to the end, really. Next steps, we've got various things on our knowledge centre, a number of information sheets, guidance, and then there is our Learning Link module, which I'm sure you'll find really useful if you want to know more. So do have a look at that. Just before Emma and I go, we just wanted to flag with you our Outstanding Governance Awards. So if you want to put your governing board or your governance professional forward, please do have a look at that. Entries are now open, and we have a number of different categories there, and the deadline is the 27th of March. So please go on our website for more information about that. We've also got some exciting events coming up in the future. So there's a few there, and many others on our website. To do have a look there. But I think it's all that's left for us is to say thank you, and really hope today was helpful. Any questions, do let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.